Welcome to Love Punch, where I'm challenging leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives to make a lasting impact. I'm your host, Ruby Fremont, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me each week as I dive into raw conversations with real impact makers.
We've all heard the importance of knowing your why. But have you ever considered knowing your what? As Steve Olsher puts it, your why is something that is external from you, and your what is something internal. Honing in on your what is the thing that is going to change the trajectory of your life and your career. Now, Steve Olsher is known as the world's foremost reinvention expert, famous for helping individuals and corporations become exceptionally clear on their what. That is the one thing they were created to do. He has a practical, no-holds-barred approach to life and business, and it propels his clients towards achieving massive profitability while also cultivating a life of purpose, conviction, and contribution. And yes, he's here on this episode to teach you how to hone in on your what and monetize on it. He's been an entrepreneur for 25 plus years. Steve is a New York Times bestselling author and creator for the News Media Summit. He's also the host of the #1 rated radio show and podcast, Reinvention Radio. So Love Punchers, if you're ready to get clear on your what and monetize it and fulfill what it is that you're here to do, keep listening. Steve, I am super fucking excited to have you here for a few reasons. One, you are someone who I deeply admire, respect, and look up to for inspiration. And two, you're just like a really awesome, down-to-earth, cool dude. Like every time we've met in person and just our connections on social, you've always been so cool. And I find that to be something that's kind of rare in our industry, where someone is actually as cool as they come across.
So. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm too old. I'm too old to be anything but Ruby. I'm not trying to impress anybody. It's like, love me, hate me, somewhere in between, and we'll get along just fine.
Yeah. And it's awesome because you have such amazing accolades, right? Like you've achieved so much. You have a #1 hit radio show. You've written so many best-selling books. You hold your own events that do so incredibly well. And yet you come across as you. And that is something that is so rare and so authentic and so real, which makes people around you want more of you. So I just wanted to add that. Yeah, I mean, some people are kind of like, okay, I've had enough of Steve.
Yeah. As my wife, she's in that category.
So one of the things that you are exceptionally amazing at, hence the title of your book, What is Your What, is really helping people hone in on their what. And I think this is such, it's an issue / non-issue. Like a lot of people have issues determining what their what is.
Yeah.
And I feel like so much of that, even just with my own journey, is like just deciphering through the bullshit that is covering up the connection to my what. So tell us more about your methodology between like, and how to discover your what.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different directions we can go on that. First and foremost, I would say that, reinvention to me, and I've kind of fallen into this world of reinvention, helping people reinvent their personal lives, helping people reinvent their businesses, et cetera. To me, reinvention is not terribly off from how you described it. And I define it as it's got really nothing to do with changing anything about you so much as it's more about kind of shedding the shackles of the bullshit and the clothes and the personalities and the agendas of others that we've put on ourselves, literally by the whims of others, right, over those years, and just kind of getting back to the core, to the essence of really who we are. So it's interesting, but reinvention to me isn't actually at all about change. It's really just more about getting back to the essence of who you were originally meant to be. Right. And so the book, as you're mentioning, and just that whole conversation around your what, and I'm sure most of your audience, God bless Simon Sinek's soul, is familiar with the whole conversation around, your why. And just so we can clarify what I mean by your what, and I had Simon Sinek on our show, Reinvention Radio. We had a nice little conversation about the why versus the what. But, to me, your why is really everything that is external. Like, you can choose your why. Like, maybe it's to, I don't know, help the homeless. Maybe it's to feed starving children in Africa. Maybe it's to provide clean drinking water to kids in India. Maybe it's you just want to take care of your family, right? I mean, it's usually something that is external that we choose, versus your what, to me, is really it's internal, right? It's that which has chosen you, as opposed to that which you have chosen. And so in the book, What is Your What, as you mentioned, on the cover there, the only graphic element that we have is the DNA strand, because I do truly believe that your what is already within you. It's that which puts fire in your soul, and it's already in your DNA. And whether or not we choose to honor that and share and monetize that, well, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I love how you identified your why versus your what, and your why being something that's external versus your what being something that's internal.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important insight to share and for people to recognize. And, I agree. Like, I feel like throughout our upbringings, we are programmed, whether we are consciously programming ourselves or unconsciously programming ourselves, but we are programmed, and we carry these different sets of beliefs, and we carry these fears, and we carry all the shoulds and the woulds and all of this creates a detachment from our what, from the essence of who we are, or from like what I like to say, like our voice, like our truth.
Sure.
And so I feel like at some point in time, we reach that place where we're like, okay, something doesn't feel right. What I'm doing doesn't feel fulfilling. I know there's something else. So at this point, then how do people start, as you said, shedding the shackles from what they thought was really their life?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you can speak to this, right? Just given your story, your history, and everything that you've been through, there's just that moment. It's like that light switch moment. And really that is the first step is, I can sit here and talk about the what is your what framework till we're blue in the face. Right. But reality is, until you turn that light switch on and you decide that, there's something more for me, that I don't like the path that I'm headed down. I mean, you can't tell someone who has been drinking every day of their life, or not every day, but, certainly in terms of their adult life, you can't just tell them to stop drinking unless they decide to put the bottle on the shelf and don't open it. Right. I mean, it's the same thing with discovering your what. You have to be ready for it. And unless you're ready for that conversation, then, I can have the best teachings on the planet, but you're not hearing me.
Yeah. I know that because I lived that for decades. And I always say it's like, you have to really want it versus like wanting to want it. Because I think there's a lot of people who walk around wanting to want something. They want to want their what, like they want to want a purpose. They want to want a mission or something that feels bigger than them, but they don't actually want it, and they let all the bullshit get in the way.
Well, they don't want to do the work.
Right.
They may want it, but they don't want to do the work that it takes to get it. I mean, like, I'll be honest, I'm as guilty as anybody looking at the Instagrams of the world and seeing, these awesome looking ladies and these awesome looking men and, dudes with six packs and, the body with their 6% body fat, like those guys.
Yeah.
But it's like, I know what to do, but the truth is I don't really want it. If I wanted it, I would have 6% body fat. I'd be competing, in those physique competitions, which I'm not going to win one of those, I mean, it's just, let's be honest. And on one hand, it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. Like, I want that. But the truth is, I don't really want it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like it's an innate push. It's not an external push. It's not like a coach telling you have to want this. It's like you actually really wanting it, and then being willing to do whatever the fuck it takes to achieve it, to get it done, to pursue it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, I could sit here and I can talk to you about the what is your what framework, right? Which is pretty simple. And I created the what is your what framework because Well, in author land, they say that you write the book that you most need.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's been a struggle all of my adult life, is really figuring out what my what is. Now, I didn't call it that at the time, but it was really just simply a matter of trying to figure out, what really puts fire in my soul and what makes me want to jump out of bed every single day to do this. And, what can I engage myself in where I just don't feel like there's enough hours in the day to get it done. And so having gone through the Myers-Briggs and the what colors your parachutes and the strengths finders and so on, all of those modalities are great, but they really left me with more questions than answers. And so that's really why I created the framework, because I needed something more tangible that could help me actually hit the ground running. And I was ready to write that book. I mean, I know you're a spiritual person, so you talk about, I think I was ready to receive that download to be able to write that book. I mean, you talk about kind of the lack of ego. I mean, I'm not egotistical enough to believe that the What Is Your What framework that I created is something that I don't know, that like it came from me. I just sat down and started writing.
Right.
And as soon as I opened myself up for that, then the ideas started to flow. And that's a big part of this conversation, right? Is just being open to whatever those conversations are. And in this case, if you're now open to the idea of figuring out what your what is, so that you can wake up with that fire in your soul and have that thing that, truly gets you to jump out of bed every morning, well, then we can talk. But otherwise, again, I'm just, I'm falling on deaf ears.
So let's say the people with deaf ears have already closed this podcast.
They're no longer listening.
They're no longer listening. And right now we only have those who are just like, Steve, tell us the fucking method.
Right. Yes. I would
What
say,
do you
great,
want to share with them?
go buy the book. No, I actually give the book.
Well, yes, go buy the book too, everyone.
Oh, no, don't go buy it. I give you the book for free. We'll talk about that later.
Awesome.
But no, it is something that let me put it to you this way. Once I started going down this path of trying to figure out what my what is and having conversations with people about it and realizing that a big part of what I am good at is teaching, and having been an entrepreneur since I'm going on 30 years now of being an entrepreneur and having created several multi-million-dollar businesses from scratch. A lot of people wanted to learn that strategy and those tactics and those sort of things from me. So I started actually teaching first around the business side of the equation. And the more that I've taught around the business side of the equation, the more that the questions came back to the fundamental fact of, I don't know what I would do with that. Like, I don't know how to apply that, which is how I backed into starting something that I called the Reinvention Workshop, where I started helping people identify what those first few pieces of the puzzle are, so they can then build something on top of that, kind of the foundational pieces, if you will, that they can then build on top of that to share and monetize what truly puts fire in their soul. And as I began working more and more with these folks, it became clear that it really just boils down to three core elements. One, and this is the What Is Your What framework, one is understanding what your core gift is. And I do believe that we have a core gift. Now, you may have a couple of things that you're good at. Like examples of gifts would be like teaching or entertaining or enrolling or protecting or communicating, et cetera, et cetera. So you may have a couple of different gifts there, but one's going to have a slight edge potentially over the others. And what I realized quite quickly in this process is that my core gift truly is communicating. And the question then is, how do you best communicate in this case? Like maybe your core gift is healing, right? So that's what you are. You are a natural born healer. Well, that's all well and good. And okay, now I have that answer, but what do I do? Well, that's where the second part of the framework comes in, which is understanding the primary vehicle that you will use to share that gift, right? So healing could be your gift. And maybe the primary vehicle is massage or acupuncture or, I don't know, I mean, a million different things that it could be. But then you have to figure out what that primary vehicle is. But then even of itself, that's not enough, because without the third piece of the framework, it still will leave you with questions. And the third part of the framework then is really understanding the people that you're most compelled to serve. So it's a combination of the gift, the vehicle, and the people that make up the what is your what framework. And that's something that you can start with tomorrow. In other words, if you can identify what your core gift is, you can identify the vehicle that you want to use to share that gift, and then you're clear on the people who you want to share that gift and vehicle with. Well, now we can start doing something. And that's what I found lacking in some of the other modalities, is it just wasn't clear how to get started. But in this case, I mean, you could literally get started tonight if you figure out what your what is today.
Right. And listeners, Steve just gave you a really tangible, practical tool. So understand your core gift, understand the vehicle to share your gift, and understand the people that you're compelled to serve. Get clear on that, and then you've got your what. And Steve, from there, because of course, we discover our what, and then we're like, cool, now what? Like, now how do I actually monetize this so that this becomes what I do for a living, and this becomes my way of achieving the vision that I have for my own personal life. So how do we monetize that?
Well, for most people, I believe that they make the mistake of just trying to jump right into it. And I guess it really depends on how far you have to fall. I mean, if you're living at home in your mom's basement, then you could jump into it right immediately without too much worry, because how far do you have to fall? But for the rest of us who have expenses, right? We have our rent, or we have our car, or food expenses, clothing expenses, et cetera, right? When we have those expenses, what I believe is you have to embrace the notion of being patient first and foremost, right? I mean, you have to understand that there is a transitionary period here. And most people just want to jump straight into it, and God bless them. But the money, that whoever said do what you love and the money will follow should be fucking slapped,
right?
Because we know that that's just not the truth. We know it's just not as easy as that. So I like to think about it in terms of more of a recipe mixture. In terms of right now, for most of us, 100% of our income is derived from what it is that we don't necessarily want to be doing, and 0% of our income is derived from our what. But there's a lot of hours in the day, right? I mean, you can go to that 9 to 5, you can do your thing. On the journey there, you can work on your what. On the journey home, you can work on your what. After hours, you can work on your what. On the weekends, you can work on your what, et cetera. And so as soon as you put something forth for the world to judge, as soon as you put something forth for the world to potentially invest in, right? And that first sale happens, well, that's when that recipe mixture starts to shift. And you now have the opportunity to focus just a little bit more on generating income around that. And before you know it, maybe 5% of what you need to make that full-on transition is derived from your what, 95% is derived from what you don't. And it goes to 90-10 and 80-20 and 70-30 and 60-40, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So enough of your income is derived from what it is that you're truly compelled to do, so that you can cut the rope. But it all really begins, in my way of thinking, with just taking that first step towards creating something that is saleable around what it is that you're truly compelled to do. Or in maybe you're in a situation where you want to help a certain type of person. Well, start immersing yourself in that world as a volunteer, right? I mean, if money's not your bag, fine, don't worry about it. But somehow start immersing yourself in that world.
That is super important, because I think in the online entrepreneurial space, what I have noticed in the entrepreneurial online space is that, a lot of this bullshit talk about, find what you love and the money will come, pursue your purpose and the money will come. And trust me, I believed that for a while, and then realized that it was more like find your purpose, spend a lot of money making it happen, spend some more money, put some blood, sweat, and tears into this, keep your old job, balance it out, figure out a way, make shit happen. I mean, it was a fucking roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. But I think the thing that gets you through all of that is your level of persistence to go after this what and to bring it alive. And also the level of resilience, because it's not this like straight shot arrow like you described, create something and something saleable and put it out there. That first thing may not necessarily sell. It may not necessarily hit your market. It may not necessarily resonate. So I mean, in your experience, have you found this to be true, and that it's more of this, like, I'm just going to throw spaghetti on the wall until something fucking sticks?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for sure. Right. I mean, first of all, there's no shame in putting something forth and not having it sell. I mean, that happens to the best of us. But until you put that first thing forth for the world to judge, you're still in that critic mode. I mean, most of us will spend our lives in that critic mode. And reality is, it is so easy to be a critic. And it is super hard to be a creator. And, when you put yourself out there as a creator, people are going to have opinions. And reality is, when you create, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're creating is needed. And that's the hard truth. And you're gonna have some misses. And reality is, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing now unless I was willing to throw some spaghetti against the wall to see what stuck. And so, like, even the New Media Summit, right? It's a fairly new event that we just started doing, which was just born out of coming into this whole world of podcasting, which I've been in now for over 9 years. But the idea of doing an event around it, and that never even occurred to me until I had a failed endeavor with someone who was very well known in the internet marketing space. And that should have been a huge hit, but it wasn't. But what was born out of that, a lot of the work that I'm doing now is really just a direct byproduct of that failure.
Interesting, because from what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm not hearing you right, but we have this what you've created these things, you found what works and you found what doesn't, and through your failures you found the things that work even better. So I guess my question is then, do you think it's possible for someone to have a what and not have something that is saleable, something that they can monetize, something that just doesn't stick?
Yeah. And reality is, not everybody wants to monetize what it is that they're truly fired up to do. And I think the best way that I can put this is, you can have a what that doesn't reflect your day job. So you can have a day job where, and there's no shame. It's like when my book, What Is Your What, was released, a lot of people loved it and there were a lot of people who hated it, and why did they hate it? Well, they hated it because they thought that what I was trying to say was that, everyone needs to be this sort of rock star. Everyone needs to be this sort of person who is changing the world, and the dialogue around that was, okay, so if all of these people are rock stars, if all of these people are out there changing the world, then who's going to pick up the garbage? Now that was the exact review title of one of the Amazon reviews, which got a life of its own, which was scary, but interesting. As I said, critic versus creator.
Right.
But who will pick up the garbage was that whole discussion. If we're all out there living this amazing life of doing our what and doing, what we truly love doing, and we're getting paid extraordinarily well for it, then who's going to pick up the garbage? And so the truth is, there's no shame in having a 9-to-5 that pays the bills. And you lean on that to, basically have the sustenance that you need to survive. And in your off hours, you then focus on really what puts fire in your soul. And that may not be something that you monetize. It just might be where you find the most joy, where you find the most pleasure. And that's okay.
That's a really important reminder, because I feel that in social media especially, people often feel pressured to take their quote unquote purpose and monetize from it, when they really just want to make that their passion project. They really just want to do this on the side. And then there's this feeling of shame that goes with it. Well, should I be monetizing this? Is what I'm doing good enough? And that trickles into all sorts of other problems. Whereas like, I feel we each have a definite what within us, and our what's vary in terms of what they are. And like, someone's what could be, they're the ones who pick up the garbage. Someone's what could be, they're the ones to teach our kids. Someone's what could, like, our what's differ, and there's not one that is better or worse than the other.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And to that end, you may not need the side hustle at all, right? I mean, what you do, it may not be glamorous by social standards, but for that person, it's exactly what they need, right? And so that is something it's hard to do, to eliminate that judgment and to try to cast ourselves upon those that you come into contact with. And so what's important to you, it may not at all be important to them whatsoever. But what I will say is that, from my experience, a lot of those types of folks that have those jobs where they just simply pay the bills from it, they do desire more, and they do want to do something else. And what I will say is that, if that is in fact reflective of where you are, one of the easiest ways to transition into living your what on more of a daily basis is to really gain clarity around what it is that you want versus what it is that you actually need. And it's a very important distinction, because right now what you want, it might be that nice condo by the beach. It might be having a car that takes you from point A to point B as you need it. You own that car, right? It might be the nicer clothes. It might be going out to eat a couple of times a week, right? And by the time you get all said and done, between the house and the car and the insurance and the clothes and the lifestyle and this, that, and the other, you've kind of put yourself in a corner of needing $5,000 a month, right? Because that's what you want. Or maybe it's 10 grand a month, or who knows what that number is, right? But if you really sat down and thought about it for a minute and got clear on what it is that you need, maybe you'd be okay with an inland studio for a couple of years. Maybe you would be okay taking public trans or Uber or Lyft or whatever for a couple of years. Maybe you would be okay eating out once every couple of weeks and cooking at home the rest of the time, so that you get your monthly nut down from $5,000 a month to maybe $2,000 a month, right? And so if you just do the raw numbers on that, if you take it down from $5,000 a month to $2,000 a month, you've just, basically what you've done is you've taken that transitionary period and you've reduced it by roughly 60%. Right? Because now if you can generate $2,000 a month from your what, you can do that full time versus having to wait until you get to $5,000 a month because you're living your life based on what it is that you think that you want. And so you need to keep working and keep working and keep working, on your what until you get to that $5,000, right? So it's a pretty dramatic difference if you just take a step back and think about what it is that you want versus what it is that you actually need. And if you're willing to, as my friend Dave Ramsey says, if you're willing to live like no one else, then later you can live like no one else. And it's pretty powerful because a lot of people don't feel like they can pursue their what on a full-time basis because they can't monetize it to that nth degree. But maybe take a step back and look at where you're at, because maybe it's a lot closer than you think.
Yeah, that is really, really key to point out. I think that we've just become accustomed to a certain type of lifestyle or to a certain way of being and living. And, it really comes down to how bad do you want it? Like if you want it bad enough, we make those adjustments, or the word that you use a lot that I love is we reinvent ourselves to to evolve into something different.
Yeah.
And for me, I've made so many adjustments just personally to continue pursuing what I do, because it's a fucking roller coaster ride. And there are some months where things are amazing and some months where things are not amazing, and that's just the ride that I've chosen to be on. But and I say nothing with such determination could sway me from my what and from what I'm doing,
Yeah.
because I'm so deeply passionate about it. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that for our listeners,
Yeah.
because
Well, you're lucky, because if it's just a month here and this ebb and flow and a month there, whatever. I mean, for me, it's like an hourly thing. Like there are some hours where I'm like, oh man, this is fucking great. And then there's
right,
some hours where I'm like, oh, this blows. And that's in one day.
right,
So
yeah.
if you're able to, just kind of keep it at bay months at a time, that's impressive.
Well, okay. So yes, day by day. I mean, literally, I'm just coming off of like a 2-week spin of like, oh, fuck, what am I doing? Why am I still doing this? And then what gets me out of it is just reminding myself of like, not just why, but that this is like the thing that was given to me. Like you
Yeah,
had mentioned at the beginning of this episode, like I feel like it was gifted to me, and
for
it's,
sure.
ever since uncovering it, I just want to continue doing this.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm really glad that you said yes to being an icon of influence at the New Media Summit, right? So that
Hmm.
you could surround yourself with other people who really understand, that journey that you're
Hmm.
on, and that's there's nothing more powerful than getting into community, and the community will keep you strong for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, and thank you. I was really honored to be an icon for your event and just to connect with different people. And I think that's one of the things also in this space that's so important, right? Is just really immersing yourself with people who get it, because it's it's really easy to place those self-imposed judgments upon ourselves when we're pursuing something that we are so deeply passionate about. And one of the things that can help is surrounding yourself, immersing yourself in environments that really fuel the fire in you, and also provide like a safe space to land
Hmm.
when you need that support.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And reality is, we can try, but none of us can effectively do this alone. I mean, we
Mhm.
can try, but I guarantee you that even if it's just, look, if you can get a coach, great. If you can't afford a coach, not a problem. Just make sure you surround yourself with people who not only can you learn from, but also you can teach. Because I think you need both ends of the spectrum. I think you get to, if you're only surrounding yourself with people that you are learning from, it's easy then to kind of feel less than, right? And
Mm.
not feel significant enough. So I do think that you need to find that balance of people that you learn from and people that you teach.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. eh, for me, it was easy to surround myself with people who inspired me, and then also equally tough to surround myself with people that would support me. Now I
Yeah.
feel like, 4 years into this, it's it's been easier, because now I really understand the necessity. It's a necessity to surround yourself with the right people. People are going to support you. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Hmm.
So, Steve, we are nearing the end of our episode, and this is where I ask you to share a love punch with our audience, something to sum up our conversation.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it really just boils down to this, which is you are the solution to someone else's problem. And there are people who are literally praying for you to show up in their lives right now. And, I think you not only do a huge disservice to yourself when you fail to share your experiences, your knowledge, that which has been given to you, as you said, but you're really doing a huge disservice to those who literally are waiting for you to show up in their lives. And so, my full belief is that once you show up in those people's lives and you present the solution to the problem that they need, and they can get up off of their knees and stop praying, well, then it's time for them to start paying, right?
Mm.
Because people absolutely should compensate you at your desired level of compensation for the brain damage and the trials and tribulations and everything else that you've had to get to where you are in your life. And, it doesn't take that much to help someone. And one of my favorite expressions is, to a second grader, a fifth grader is a god.
Mm.
And that's really all it takes. Just be willing to teach people who are a couple steps behind you, and you can make a dramatic difference in their lives.
Thank you. You are the solution to someone else's problem.
Word.
Great, great love punch. Steve, how can people stalk you online? Where do they find you? Where do they creep on you?
Right. Well, we've been talking about the What Is Your What framework, and
Yep.
earlier on I said you can grab a free copy of that book. So we give away a free copy of the entire New York Times bestseller, What Is Your What? Discover the one amazing thing you were born to do, at whatisyourwhat.com. So I highly recommend that folks go to whatisyourwhat.com, grab a free copy of that book. And when you do that, then you'll be in my world, in my ecosystem, and hopefully I'll add some more value to you along the way. But that's probably the best place to get started.
Awesome. So I will have that link in the show notes. I also want to add that you should subscribe to Reinvention Radio if you want to hear more of Steve and his no bullshit ways. He is truly refreshing to listen to. So hit subscribe. Steve, thank you so much for being on Love Punch. I know that our listeners have gotten a lot out of this episode, and I just appreciate you immensely.
Yeah, well, right back at you. Thanks for having me on.
To our listeners, I just want to say thanks for joining us on today's episode of Love Punch, where I'm challenging thought leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs like you to make a lasting impact. If you love this episode with me and Steve, hit share and hit subscribe. If you want to say hi, reach out to me or Steve online, and I will see you back here next week with a brand new episode of Love Punch.